afternoon and welcome to Parkinson's TV. I'm Dr. Jory Fleischer and today we'll be talking about nutrition and Parkinson's. What kind of issues do people with Parkinson's face when it comes to nutrition? And what about interactions with protein? What's the deal with that? So I'm looking forward to answering these questions today with my three guests. So Dr. John Andrzejczak, it's great to have you here. You were diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2015 and you're currently working as the Dean of Students at Queens College at the City University of New York. Thanks so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your personal experiences.
Thank you.
And to your left, Eileen Kapellner. You've been working as a nutritionist for over 25 years and currently at Mount Sinai in New York, where you specialize in seeing individuals with neurological disorders.
Right.
Looking forward to your expertise to weigh in on all these important questions about nutrition.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And our special guest from the Netherlands, Dr. Bas Bloem, Professor of Neurology at Radboud University in the Netherlands. You're also one of the founders of ParkinsonNet. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So I can't wait to learn more about nutrition from all of you. We've received a couple of questions from our viewers, and we'll take those towards the end of this episode. So John, I want to start with you. What role does nutrition play in your life and your journey with Parkinson's?
It was easy for me because I was already a vegan, so I don't eat cheese, I don't drink. I try to eat nuts for neuroplasticity, is that right? I try to eat a lot of nuts, green leafy vegetables, so I've made, try to increase that. My wife always reminds me if I don't. Antioxidants, and that's about it.
Okay. Eileen, do you want to comment on that? Are there foods that people with Parkinson's should be thinking about? Does that sound?
Well, that sounds like you're on track. There's really no one diet for Parkinson's, but I do recommend, as you can see on the table here, an anti-inflammatory diet, which you mentioned has a lot of antioxidants because there's a lot of inflammation in the body with Parkinson's, and I think that inflammation is really like the root cause of a lot of these neurological diseases like Parkinson's. And if you eat more antioxidants, it kind of soaks up those, free radicals that causes cell damage. And the foods on this table are part of that diet.
Great. John, has your diet changed at all in the past couple of years since your diagnosis? Do you feel like you've altered anything about the way that you eat?
I definitely drink less caffeine. Because it just makes the tremor worse, especially those horrible energy drinks. I've given up on those. Again, I try, even as a vegan, I try to eat more healthy instead of just peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which is sometimes the only option. I eat more green leafy vegetables. I try to eat at the faculty dining room, which has a better healthy buffet than eating French fries from the cafeteria with the students. And like I said, I look out for antioxidants and try to increase nuts in my diet and green leafy vegetables.
So it sounds like John is kind of doing everything right, Eileen, yeah. But what kind of nutrition problems do you see commonly crop up in people with Parkinson's disease?
Most of the time people reach out to me because of weight loss. And that can occur for a lot of different reasons. I see a lot of people with depression and loneliness and just a decreased appetite. Sometimes the medications cause them to feel nauseous, swallowing problems, feeding problems, especially in terms of having like really severe tremor. And just having tremor increases your caloric needs. And so a lot of people lose weight like that. And it's an individual thing, but those are some of the reasons why people would come to me, mainly the weight loss.
Got it.
Another big problem is constipation, and Parkinson's tends to interfere with the digestive functions and it slows motility. But one of the biggest problems I find with Parkinson's, and maybe just people and especially elderly in general, is dehydration. And, food is divided into three major macronutrients: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. But water is really an essential nutrient for everyone, just life. And if you don't drink enough, you're definitely going to get constipated, but you might even feel dizzy, and that might cause you to be off balance. And it's really important to drink. So I recommend at least 6 to 8 glasses of fluid a day, and it could be anything you like. You know, tea, just not caffeine. You're already doing that. So that's a very important concept, I think, for constipation and in general health.
I just want to pick up on something that you said. So in terms of the caffeine, I mean, do you recommend that people stop drinking caffeine? Can they continue? Do they have to offset it in any way? How do you?
Well, offset it in terms of it will deplete, like, you know, the water again. So for every cup of caffeine, you have to drink an extra glass of water. But I've actually read some studies, I don't know if you're familiar, that caffeine is good to prevent Parkinson's. But then again, I'm sure if you have a tremor, it might exasperate it. Is that true?
Yeah, so this is work done in people who do not have Parkinson's disease.
Right.
If you drink caffeine or black tea, that is associated with a reduced risk of future development of Parkinson's disease.
Right.
Whether caffeine does any good when you have Parkinson's disease is unknown. Actually, we don't even know whether caffeine itself is protective. All we know is that there is an association, but it doesn't mean that the caffeine itself is the protective agent. It might be that people who are on the verge of developing Parkinson's lose their appetite for caffeine. So there might be other spurious associations between caffeine and reduced risk of developing Parkinson's. So there's no real need to drink caffeine for that reason for when you have Parkinson's.
So it seems more like correlation, not necessarily causation at this point.
The correlation is there, whether it's causation, that we don't know.
Okay. And what about, so Eileen brought up this issue of weight loss in people with Parkinson's. As a physician, as a neurologist, what do you think about? How do you work through that when you see someone whose weight is trending down?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. On the one hand, weight loss by itself is not necessarily a bad thing. The less pounds or kilograms you have to carry around, the less work you need to do. So by itself, it's not necessarily bad. Weight loss can become a problem if it is associated with malnutrition. What we do frequently see is that people have a reduced intake, not just a reduced caloric intake, but also vital ingredients such as, for example, vitamins. And then the malnutrition is bad, and that's when I typically refer people to a dietitian to look at their of what they are eating.
And the weight is a good measure of malnutrition. So if a person's at a healthy weight, then they'll probably be okay. But and the weight loss also, just in terms of losing muscle, will just make it more difficult to walk, and then you'll be increased risk for falling, and just in general, maintaining a healthy weight gives you more energy, and it helps you function at your highest level. Yeah. And I think it also helps to the effectiveness of the medication. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, so we typically don't adjust the medication for body weight. So sometimes we see patients who were previously maybe overweight, had a particular dose of medication, have now lost a lot of weight, and now suddenly that dose that used to be right is maybe now a little bit overdosed for your current body weight, and they become more dyskinetic. And these excessive movements in turn, like tremor, can lead to further weight loss. So that's when you need to be careful, and you're absolutely right. We need to actually weigh our patients as neurologists every time, and when you see that weight loss, it could be a hint of malnutrition.
Right, and I think it's also unexplained, like significant weight loss is also a red flag. So significant is like 5% of your weight in a month or 10% in 6 months. And a lot of times I see people and they just come in and they just drop the weight. They don't even, it just happened. And that's a red flag, in my opinion, and you really have to prevent that from happening and stop the weight loss. So, and to do that, I would, it's an individual thing, so you have to find out what you're eating. Some people can't tolerate 3 big meals. I recommend 6 meals a day, shakes, smoothies. I mean, if you're not eating this, you can just put almost everything in here in a blender and drink it. Just a quick way, especially if you have a swallowing problem, to get that nutrition in and calories. So I think that there's a lot of different tricks, and it's very individual.
Great. John, do you have any personal experience with a dietitian?
No, but I did lose, I think when I came to see you, I was 13 pounds lighter than I thought I was.
Yeah. Sounds
So it was, you know, it was actually my dentist who caught it. He was like, "Oh my God." But once I was on the medication, the weight came back. So.
Right.
And then, of course, the other issue that we haven't talked about yet is, so people eat less, maybe because of the constipation, but also because it tastes less well because of their reduced smell.
Yes.
And that's another big issue. And then again, the dietitian can recommend maybe more spicy food, so it becomes more tasty to actually consume your meals.
There's also something very unique that I notice about Parkinson's patients is that they just don't have like the initiation or the motivation to actually prepare their foods, or I just feel like they would skip a meal if you didn't put the food in front of them.
Yeah.
Everything has to be convenient and easy. Like they can't even open the refrigerator and start looking for a drink or food. Everything has to be right in front, open it up, eat it, or microwave it. Otherwise they just skip meals and they lose weight.
Yeah.
They just don't do it on their own.
That is true. If something is easy and convenient, then I will do it. But otherwise, you know, life becomes so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then, of course, people sitting at home might think, well, that's stupid. Why don't they do it? And are they to blame? Well, we know that Parkinson's disease is a very complex condition, and the dopamine, the neurochemical substance that's missing in the brain that's responsible for the motor symptoms, the slowness and the stiffness and the tremor, is also the chemical that you need to develop an initiative, to do something and to plan something. So apathy, lack of initiative, difficulties planning is a key feature of Parkinson's disease.
Right, there's often this lack of oomph that people
Yes.
sort of lose the oomph that motivates them to do.
Yeah.
Right, depression.
And there's depression,
You
which
will
is
stop eating quickly with depression.
And then it gets to be a whole cycle, because if you get deficient in nutrients, some of the nutrients cause you to have like less of an appetite, and keeps going on and on.
So it
Losing
sounds
your sense of smell is a big thing,
Yeah.
because food is much less attractive.
Yeah. And that's why, again, weight loss is a marker that something's happening. And then you need a careful workup to see, is it depression? Is it the lack of initiative? Is it the lack of smell? Is it the fear of constipation? And then give it tailored advice.
right. So it sounds like pretty multifactorial, and it sounds like when they're coming to see you, Eileen, that there is no one size fits all. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a team approach.
So one question that I know comes up in the clinic a lot, and that we've talked about, John, is this issue of protein. You know, what's the issue with protein? So Buzz, do you want to take that sort of, where does protein fit in terms of Parkinson's and medications, and what is this issue?
Yeah, so levodopa is an amino acid, and proteins, when you consume them, are degraded into amino acids. And I always tell my patients, levodopa, when it enters the gut, goes on a conveyor belt and needs to be transported into the blood. If the conveyor belt is filled with other amino acids coming from your diet, it's just full, and the levodopa is never absorbed. So taking the levodopa, this is not applying to dopamine agonists, but particularly the levodopa, taking that simultaneously with a high protein meal, like a big steak, or maybe a glass of milk or yogurt, is not a good idea. I see patients who say, I'm resistant to the medication, or it doesn't work as well as I was hoping, and you simply tell them to not take the levodopa with meals, and particularly to avoid high protein content meals. Simply the same dose of medication will work.
And so how do you space the medicine then? Do you have someone just cut out? Because I've certainly had people that go online, they read about this protein thing, and they say, I'm on a no protein diet. How do you, is that the right thing to do?
Well,
How
there's
do
a
you
couple of
space
things.
it?
I always consult a dietitian.
I wouldn't recommend
No, so I'll give you my 2 cents worth, you know, and then we'll listen to your view. So oftentimes, later in the course of the disease, people need to take maybe 6 up to 8 times medication. And then you tell them not with the meals. So now you need to plan 11 to 12 events a day, and it drives people crazy. At the same time, you need proteins for other good reasons. So don't avoid proteins altogether. The problem is avoid it simultaneously. There's the anecdote of my it's the timing. So I had the anecdote of my patient who had severe gait problems, freezing of gait, and he stuck his levodopa pill literally into a hump of Dutch cheese and swallowed it.
Game over.
Game over. When we said get rid of the cheese, at the same time take it with water, and he was fine and he could walk. So The frequency of all the events that people need to plan is a big issue, but don't avoid proteins altogether, but spread it over the course of the day. And how to do it, then I say, I'm a stupid doctor, ask the dietitian.
Right.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of juggling, but definitely at least 30 minutes before, do you agree?
Yeah.
Like on an empty stomach?
Yeah.
And then you have to almost like put yourself on a schedule and you know, especially if you're on 6 pills a day, that's a lot. Do you use, we had this discussion afterwards, we were actually talking about the long-acting or the slow release.
Yeah, so we had an episode on medication. So all the people watching warmly recommend to also see the episode on medication. In my personal experience, long-acting medication, particularly when people have slow bowel movements, is not a good idea. I'm personally a great fan of the immediate release medication. There's dissolvable versions, Matapar dispersible. I'm a great fan of those, and I always recommend my patients to take the levodopa with a sparkling mineral water, because the amino acid dissolves better in an acid environment. Orange juice or sparkling mineral water usually makes the medication work better and more reliably.
And Eileen, we're sort of talking about protein, and I think people think, you know, protein, they envision like a big piece of steak, but are there other hidden sources of protein? Are there protein, you know, for someone who's not a dietitian or maybe is sort of just facing this diagnosis?
He can probably answer that as well too, because he's vegan. So right here on the table, you know, we have yogurt, eggs, those are protein sources. You know, fruits and vegetables don't have any protein, you know that. And I'm a big fan of protein and also fat. I don't think with Parkinson's anybody should be avoiding fat, because fat has twice the amount of calories, and I think fat is better than sugar. I think sugar is very inflammatory, so when in doubt, eat fat. So don't buy anything low fat, because you want to maintain your weight. But in terms of protein, you know, most of it is the chicken, fish, meat, eggs, cheese, yogurt, and the beans. But the beans and the lentils are a little incomplete, so you have to. I'm sure you do the combining and that kind of stuff to make it a complete protein. But I'm a very big fan of eggs. I know you're not eating those right now.
What about the avocado for good fat?
Absolutely, that's exactly an example of a really good healthy fat. Getting back to eggs, I think eggs are probably the most perfect food on the planet. I think it's easy to eat. It's great high quality protein, has great nutrients. And I would say eat eggs every day. Make a different omelet with peppers, mushrooms, onions. That's an example of a breakfast. Another example would be the Greek yogurt with nuts and blueberries, which are I like blueberries. They're very anti-inflammatory and a lot of antioxidants. And just the more colors, the better. So sticking to real food, nothing in a bag or a box, anything that grows in the ground, like so the safer starches, even though I don't tell people to eat gluten and bread and a lot of carbohydrates, because I think eating extra sugar is just not healthy. So things like sweet potatoes, even brown rice, things that grow in the ground are the safer starches. Certainly if you wanted to lose weight, I would say even cut back on more, but I'm not gonna, that's not your problem.
What about turmeric?
Turmeric is excellent. So these are the few recommendations I would have for supplements. And I recommend this for anybody in this room. Probiotics. I think there's a big relationship between a healthy gut and diseases. So I think probiotics is good for everyone. Magnesium is another supplement I recommend for everyone, because a lot of people are deficient in that. Vitamin D, I think that's a very big problem, and everyone's deficient. I'm sure, is that a problem in your country too?
Yeah, no, definitely. So the Dutch take on supplements is, I strongly feel with you that probiotics are good. I don't think there's any scientific evidence in Parkinson's disease to support that, so I'm a little bit more cautious with that. Same for magnesium. Vitamin D is different. There's good literature that many people with Parkinson's become vitamin D deficient, and that reduces the risk of osteoporosis, brittle bones, which increases the risk of fractures when you fall.
Right.
So measuring your vitamin D and supplementing
Very
that
important.
is definitely a good idea.
And what about just sort of speaking to the vitamin D? I've had patients that tell me, no, it's fine because I spend a ton of time out in the sun. Is spending a ton of time unprotected out in the sun an appropriate?
I don't think that's a full protection.
Yeah, you still
I
have
wish
to
it
measure
were.
it.
Being out in the sun helps. If you're in Holland, you have a problem.
Yes, that's what I said.
So get it measured and take supplements if needed.
Another mention of, you said osteoporosis, and I think that's a good point to speak about as well. You know, we all are losing bone, and I think the best way, besides vitamin D and calcium and phosphorus, even magnesium, K2 is a good supplement for bones, but the best way to improve bone, I think, is to eat bone. And so I recommend people to make bone broths, and that's in every culture, bone broth. So it's very easy to make a bone broth. You just take either chicken bones or meat bones, and you put them in water, and you add a little acid like lemon juice or vinegar, and that leaches out all the nutrients from the bone into the liquid, and then you drink it, and you're getting all those nutrients, and you can count that towards your fluid. And I think that's a very healthy thing for people to do, bone broth.
Terrific.
You can use a crock pot.
Good advice. I'm learning a lot myself.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the items on the table in a little bit more detail and sort of why they're here with Parkinson's disease. So Eileen, is someone with Parkinson's able to eat all of these foods? Are there foods that they should be avoiding? Are there any no-no foods for people with Parkinson's?
So like I mentioned before, there's really no depth. I think that this is an example of an anti-inflammatory diet that's healthy for everyone, because I think that it has a lot of antioxidants, and I think that that's what you should be focusing on to prevent that cell damage. And so basically, the more colors and the more variety, the better, and sticking to this concept of real foods, whole foods. So again, you know, a sample menu for, you know, the breakfast would be like omelets, the yogurt. Lunch or dinner could be vegetables and a protein. And when I say a protein, probably like the size of your cell phone or a deck of cards. I think that's like a good rule of thumb to do. And of course, taking your medications 30 minutes before you eat any meal. So
anything that people can't eat? Are there off-limit
that's
foods?
individual. Basically, if you have a swallowing problem, I would change the consistency. I think people with swallowing problems, and you'll probably have a speech therapist, and if you haven't had one on the episodes yet, but I work with one closely, and we usually change the consistency, or we add moisture to food, so you can swallow something that has more gravy or sauce or oil on it a lot easier if the food is dry. So moist, soft kind of foods is easier to swallow, and sometimes I use a blender. And I say to the person, just blenderize it for a second so that they can eat most of their food blenderized, so they complete their meal, so they get their calories, but to still save a small portion of it regular, so they get that satisfaction of really chewing that food. But sometimes they get fatigued when you have to chew, and yeah. So using a blender is a great technique, a crock pot, which cooks the food moist, the meat falls apart, it's very juicy because you have to use a lot of fluid. So I think that if you have swallowing problems, you have to work with consistency, and if you have problems with the swallowing of liquids, then the best thing to do is to thicken it with like, I don't use like the commercial thickeners. People tend not to like them, so we just use fruit, like applesauce. Just mix that with water, and that's a good way of taking the L-Dopa rather than a big chunk of cheese.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. John, have you had to make specific changes to your diet? Do you think about diet in relation to your Parkinson's on a daily basis, or is it not an issue?
I don't think about it too much. Again, I'm already a vegan, so I eat a lot of these foods naturally. I must admit I'm horrible with carbs, and I'm always wondering what's the relationship between carbs and Parkinson's. Because I love pizza without cheese or with vegan cheese, and I love pasta, so why is that bad?
Well, it's just the gluten, I think, is very inflammatory. So the gluten would be something like the pasta. But I make a great cauliflower pizza, if you want the recipe, which is made just with cauliflower. I don't know if that's popular there. What they are using a product here called cauliflower rice. So it's a substitute for rice, and it has no carbs, so it's not inflammatory. And you mix this cauliflower rice with some cheese and an egg, although right now you're not doing that. But you actually make a dough out of that, and then you put sauce and cheese on it, and you bake it, and it's this amazing pizza. But just in terms for you, when you talk about carbs, you're probably better off eating things that grow in the ground, like the sweet potatoes and the squash, rather than something in a bag like bread or, pasta.
I avoid white bread at all costs.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say avoid everything white.
I like that we're getting advice and recipes at the same time. I didn't know about cauliflower pizza, so this is brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great recipe.
So, Boss, there's more and more research about nutrition in Parkinson's disease, and there are diets that have been proposed as this is a diet for Parkinson's, this is a diet for Parkinson's. Can you speak to some of that research or some of the hypothetical diets for Parkinson's, if those are such a thing?
Yeah. I was at the World Parkinson Congress in Portland in September last year. I chaired the session on dietary issues for Parkinson's, and the room was filled. It was jam-packed. It was maybe one of the most popular sessions. So it's telling about the interest in dietary issues, and there's now much more science behind it. Separate categories. There is discussion now about diets that might either increase or reduce the risk of developing future Parkinson's disease. We talked about the coffee. And there is ideas that a vegan diet might help to protect people from developing Parkinson's disease. It clearly didn't prevent your Parkinson's disease, but it's always about the relative risk of developing something. There are issues around milk products increasing the risk of future development of Parkinson's disease, maybe because the pesticides that the cows are consuming ends up in the milk, so that people who consume lots of milk or milk products, dairy products, may have a higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease. There's no specific need to avoid dairy products when you have the disease, other than the interaction with the levodopa. And then there is the big discussion whether the antioxidants might help to slow down the progression of the disease once you have it. There's exciting work in rodents to suggest that it might work, but a mouse or a rat is not a human being. So while there is good hope that the antioxidants might help to slow the progression, and I would warmly recommend all patients to take antioxidants, we can't promise the patients today that it will slow down the progression of the disease. More work is needed there.
And do you recommend that your patients get those antioxidants in the form of a supplement, or do you recommend that they try to get it from food? How do you help them navigate that?
The Dutch feet in the clay sort of opinion is avoid supplements when possible, just take a healthy diet. So the food that's on the table, I always learn from my dietitians, you should recognize it as food. Yeah. If you still recognize it as food, that's the stuff you need to take. The key supplements that we provide is vitamin D. There's lots of other supplements. We can talk for ages about all the other supplements, which occasionally may be good, but I think in general, take healthy food.
I wanted to comment. I think it's also about the ratio, so between the omega-3s and omega-6s, so that, again, if you're going to be eating a lot of junk food, which has a lot of omega-6s, then you're going to have to balance it out with extra antioxidants, omega-3s, that it's like in healthy fish and things like that. So it has to do with the ratio as well.
You said that, a vegan diet may stay off Parkinson's. What about the severity? Like, I often wonder, if I didn't have such a good diet and if I wasn't exercising, what's the possibility that my symptoms would have been more severe?
The evidence is strongest for exercise. We will have a separate session of ParkinsonTV on exercise, and again, all the viewers are warmly recommended to view that session as well. I think exercise works like a drug. It reduces symptoms. It might slow down the progression of the disease. That we don't know, but it definitely works like a drug. And I strongly feel that a healthy diet helps to fight Parkinson's disease. And the good thing is, you know, people, when you have a disease, you go to your doctor and people sort of almost lean back and become dependent on drugs. Whereas there are a lot of things people can do themselves, and the diet is one key element of the things you can do to create a better life. And I'm personally convinced that you are better off now because of your healthy diet.
Thanks.
I mean, John, you're a great example of someone who said, like, what else can I do beyond medicine, you know, beyond sort of like the traditional approach. And, you know, as your doctor, I think that's why you're doing so very well, is because you sort of take all of this in and you've sort of taken ownership of the disease. So I think that's a really powerful message.
Yeah. I've seen people with, for example, severe constipation, change their diet, have faster bowel movements, and be totally different patients the next time I would see them. So regular bowel movements, the frequent fluid intake, I just want to re-emphasize what you were saying, 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. I had one patient who had 2 Coca-Cola bottles. Can be any other brand. I have no stock in Coca-Cola. Took 2 empty bottles, labeled it 1 and 2, and put them on the table, and they had to be empty by the end of the day. As a visual cue, you know, we talked about initiative. Empty those 2 bottles by the end of the day, and it was way better.
That's great. I mean, goal-oriented, you can see
Goal-oriented,
that. It's really
labeled 1 and 2 with a big black marker.
beautiful.
Beautiful. Tip of a patient.
What about, Eileen, constipation? So we talked about water for constipation, but this is something that comes up all the time. And, you know, yes, there are things out there over the counter, but what do you recommend nutrition-wise to help people with constipation?
Fiber, just all this fruits and vegetables and exercise and then the water. I mean, I guess even if you recommended a medication like a Colace or a laxative, you still have to drink water.
Exactly.
It doesn't work unless, you know.
Again, don't depend on the drugs. Start with your diet first, plus the exercise. Don't forget the water. If it then fails, sometimes you need the laxatives, but it only is a third-line treatment.
I think sometimes we forget that even if you didn't have Parkinson's, eating this is going to make you feel better.
Exactly.
So even if it doesn't affect your Parkinson's, you'll increase the quality of your life by just changing your diet.
Totally
Right,
agreed.
like this diet is like the perfect health diet for everybody here. You don't have to
Exactly.
have a disease, and I think that now people realizing that there needs to be more and more research in nutrition, because it really does affect a lot of different diseases.
Absolutely.
I mean, this kind of diet is probably even good for like cancer, all the neurological diseases, diabetes, and a lot of times you live a long time with Parkinson's and you might develop these other things, so this is good for everybody.
Wonderful. So each episode we answer some questions that have been sent to us by our viewers. So let's take a look at some of those questions. Someone wrote in, I have trouble swallowing. How do I manage to still take in enough nutrients?
So I think I touched base on that with the consistency, and I think the easiest way to get that nutrition in is probably a shake. So if you don't have a blender, get one, and you just probably can put in a lot of this, like yogurt and kale and peanut butter, blueberries, avocado, boom, you have a shake. If you want to add more calories, put some of the coconut oil. I think coconut oil is very anti-inflammatory, and you can just put a tablespoon of that into the shake, and that's an easy way to get calories and nutrients and nutrition if you have a swallowing problem.
And if you freeze the fruit, you can avoid watering down it with ice, you know. Just use frozen fruit instead of ice.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
We talked a bit about constipation being a big problem and people asking what they can do about that. Anything that we missed in terms of the constipation front? Any foods that you think are constipating that we might not know about?
Sugar, I think what happens is if you're eating a lot of sugar and sugary foods, then you're not eating the other foods. So if you cut that out, then you're just going to be eating more, fiber and more healthy foods. So.
Terrific. Someone asked, they said, I really have to watch my protein intake. How do I know if I'm taking in too much or too little protein, and what are the risks? So, boss, is there, when a patient's presenting to you with a problem, is there a typical story that tells you, like, oh, this must be protein getting in the way? Is there something that sort of sets off that alarm for you?
Well, I think what we talked about is spreading over the day is key. So I do hear stories of people saying, I take this gargantuous steak for dinner and I'm really punished. So the interesting thing is there are people who are literally punished by taking high protein meals, but not all of them. And people usually know. I literally have patients who say, I take a steak, I eat a big fish, and I'm literally punished. They don't need any incentive or reminder. They will spread out the proteins over the day. But there are patients who are not as, suffer as much from the high protein meals. So I do a careful history taking, and I basically recommend people to spread the proteins over the day, but not avoid them altogether. If they find it difficult to plan it themselves, go to a dietitian.
And I've had people, I don't know if this has been your experience in terms of dose failures, which sometimes we'll ask patients about, and I don't know if everyone really fully understands this, but usually that's in the context of someone who's taking levodopa, and maybe they've been taking it no problem for a while, and then what do you see happen with that? Like if someone's having a dose failure, what is that?
Yeah, so dose failures is patients who respond very well to some doses of medication, and they take another dose maybe 2-3 hours later, and they say it's like water. We've long felt that this was a brain mechanism, but I think 9 out of 10 times it's the gut that is to blame. And very often, and I think most people will know this, first morning dose works brilliant. They take their second dose 11 a.m., works fairly well. They take a big lunch, and suddenly the 2 p.m. dose doesn't work. And it's related to the food intake prior to that medication intake. So dose failures, if some doses work well, others don't, look at your gut, look at your diet, and spread it.
And I think it's kind of hard for people to recognize that pattern sometimes, so I always encourage people, if that seems like that's an issue for you, try to keep, even for 3 days, keep like a diary of here's when I took my meds, here's what I ate, here's how I felt.
Exactly.
Is there anything else, Eileen, do you think, in terms of keeping a food diary, is that useful?
But it's not just writing it down. You have to look at it and learn from it. Like, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? To figure it out. Because a lot of people say, well, here's my numbers, here's my diary, whatever. And you have to really study it and learn from it and discuss it with you.
Yeah, but I think keeping that diary is a very good idea to gain insights and then to discuss it with your doctor.
Yeah. Bring it into the office. We want
Bring it into the office.
Same thing with diabetes. They say, well, here's all my numbers, but you have to learn from it. Like, what did I eat that made the number go so high,
Yeah. Wonderful. John, as someone living with us on a day-to-day basis, do you, any sort of last thoughts about food and nutrition and Parkinson's?
I think it's just like everything else with Parkinson's, the more you share with family and friends, the more that they can help you. So I've told the chef at the faculty dining room, and he often will prepare a version of the meal that I can eat or that would be better for me. He's just the nicest guy in the world. So, if you want people to help you and you want it to be convenient, right, because otherwise we won't do it, then, you've just got to ask family and friends for help.
Great, that's terrific. All right. And with that answer to that last viewer's question, it's time to wrap up this session. So thank you so much to our wonderful viewers for tuning in. We hope that this was helpful and you've learned a few pearls. I think I want to reiterate that if you've lost 5% of your weight in a month or 10% in 6 months, that should be a big red flag. Think about protein, write it down if there's some question. And a huge thank you to our guests, to Eileen, to John, and to Bas. Thank you so much. And please let us know what you think about Parkinson's TV in the comments. So once again, thanks so much for watching, and we hope you'll join us again soon.